Are you struggling to recover from narcissistic abuse? You're not alone. Millions of people go through this kind of abuse every year, and most don't even know it. If you're feeling like you can't go on or there's no hope for you, I'm here to tell you that there is. You can recover, but it won't be easy. It takes time, patience, and lots of self-love. But it is worth it. And in today's video, I'm going to share several important tips to help you heal. Now, if you're just joining us for the first time, make sure that you go check out the first and second segment of this series. We examined how narcissism is often characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance and a need for constant validation from others. It can also be manifest in 4 subcategorical ways, and this includes prosocial, antisocial, malignant, and vulnerable or covert narcissists. In today's segment, we are going to explore the 2 most important steps in recovering from narcissistic abuse and/or your own narcissistic wounding, including a step-by-step method for articulating your needs and personal boundaries with confidence and sophistication. Now, by the end of this segment, you will have the tools to make confident and clear decisions for yourself in love. Recognize when a partner is not a good match for you, without a doubt. Know exactly what to look for in a compatible partner that will cherish you and want to meet your unique needs. And end boundary violations in your love life for good. So grab a pencil and paper because you are definitely going to want to take notes, and be sure to stick with me until the end. Now, before we dive in, if you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Briana MacWilliam, and I am a licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist, author, and educator with more than 15 years in the field, helping adults struggling with insecure attachment go from self-doubting to self-sovereign so they can attract those soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want without having to talk in circles around their feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. And I do this using a psycho-spiritual approach to creative arts interventions using the MacWilliam method. Today, I'm going to be sharing a clip of a live stream event that took place inside my private Facebook groups, which people can access once they've purchased one of my online courses. If you're interested in finding out if you might have insecure attachment, check out the link in the caption of this video. You'll be able to take an easy 4-question quiz and find out your attachment style, plus a detailed explanation. Now, if you like what you see in here, and you haven't yet, make sure that you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. I put up videos once or twice a week, and sometimes I will do occasional live streams through my YouTube channel, and I wouldn't want you to miss out. Okay, so where I really wanted to start from today was actually picking up from where we left off in our last live stream event, and that was talking about narcissistic abuse, if you'll recall, and recovering from that, not just abuse, but also looking at narcissistic wounding and what that means to have narcissistic wounds, and hopefully removing some of the stigma around that term, because what we're trying to compassionately draw attention to here is how sometimes we can express our coping skills for or response to narcissistic wounding in what appear to be polar opposite ways. But what is drawing us together is the similar string that is being plucked, right? The same wound that we are coping with in very different ways. So what does it mean to recover from narcissism or narcissistic abuse? So what is probably the most disruptive and confusing thing about recovering from narcissistic abuse or our own narcissistic wounding is the sifting and sorting through the emotional chaos that we're left with. And that can be exacerbated by a hypervigilant nervous system that is super sensitive to attachment needs and threats. And so that looks like feelings of isolation and dissociation, or what's called depersonalization. It's sort of like as if you were on the outside looking in on your life. It could be freezing up in intense fear in the face of a relatively benign disagreement. It could be difficulty making decisions for yourself, a sort of pervasive feeling like you've done something wrong no matter what it is. There can be unexplained physical symptoms like appetite changes, nausea, stomach pain, muscle fatigue, insomnia, things like that. There could be a general sense of anxiety or restlessness, feeling disconnected from your body and from yourself. You might feel confused about your identity, feel like you don't recognize who you are anymore. It might be hard to say no or to set any kind of boundary, or shutting down and saying no to everything. It could be feelings of profound sadness, hopelessness, or even depression. So recovering from these things, I believe, requires two important aspects. And the first is being able to build a robust emotional vocabulary. And for those of you that have taken the anxious, avoidant, disorganized, or secure 101 courses, in all of them, we talk about building a robust emotional vocabulary, right? So this will be an extension of that. And the second is establishing personal boundaries, so you can experience a more realistic and secure sense of agency and even identity, okay, if that applies. So I want to begin with what it means to build an emotional vocabulary. So when we feel overwhelmed or we are emotionally dysregulated, it can lead to expressing ourselves in kind of a vague and unclear fashion. And that winds up sending mixed signals to ourselves and to our partners. So for example, you could feel a jolt of stimulation and arousal around like a big change in your life, or even a new partner entering into your life. And maybe you feel excited, you're a little bit nervous, you're a little anticipatory, maybe there are some doubts creeping in, you feel a little challenged, you're exhilarated, but you're also worried. And all of this is going on at the same time. But because we have not either been taught to recognize and sift and sort through those energetic states, those emotions, and our inner experiences with a whole lot of sophistication, or because you may have been systematically conditioned out of being able to trust your instincts versus your intuition, then you get overwhelmed by all of that charge, right? That energy that those different conflicting, ambiguous feelings are now creating in the mind and body. And so then we spiral into feeling scared and confused, and then we kind of lump all these similar but nuanced feelings into one big category. Usually it's bad feelings or anxious feelings or overwhelmed feelings. And then maybe we do things like end the relationship prematurely because we're scared and we don't think that we can cut it, right? Or clinging too tightly because we're worried there's something that is wrong about us. And if we give them too much space to look at us too closely, they'll figure it out, right? And so then to prevent that from happening, it's important to recognize that those feelings that we're lumping together that are so confusing, these are energetic states moving through our bodies. And so that means that we want to start by focusing on the physical sensations that we're having in the body that are associated with these charges. And that is going to help you mentally organize them, usually through symbol formation, so that later we can describe them and take action on them in more sophisticated ways, such as with words, right? More accurate words and descriptions. And that all adds up to having clarity around what you really want and need. So this is very early developmental stuff, right? We talked a little bit about this in a previous live stream, another video I have called Conceptualizing Attachment Styles as Nervous System Responses. So I invite you to check out that video if you want to hear me go a little bit more in depth into how that works. But in a nutshell, we develop that emotional vocabulary first by attending to how the body is organizing that energy, creating a symbol for that organization. Then the symbol allows us to assign nonverbal information, sensorial information, visceral information that we are receiving, assign it to a symbol. And then once we have enough symbols collected, now we can start putting language on it, right? We start adding language to this. And once we start adding language to this, guess what improves? Our communication, right? Our communication becomes that much clearer and that much more, not only effective at communicating what we want, but also clarifying for ourselves what we want. And so then when we get it, all of a sudden a need feels satisfied when we weren't able to get it satisfied before. So that's sort of the first piece, is building that emotional vocabulary, teasing out the nuances of our energetic expression and understanding what that's telling us about our emotions and the needs that are attached to them. Okay, that's one. Now, the second one is establishing personal boundaries. Now, once we have all that information, we've engaged with that process in an effective way, that means we are much better equipped to establish personal boundaries. And for anyone that has struggled with partners that have narcissistic wounding or when we ourselves have struggled with narcissistic wounding, boundaries inevitably becomes the thing, the magic pill, right? We have to learn how to establish our boundaries. So once we start developing that robust emotional vocabulary, that means we're capable of identifying, of honoring, and honoring our personal boundaries with increased sophistication, because our feeling states are now cluing us into what feels good and what doesn't. What do we like and what do we not like, right? Especially when it comes to love and relationships. So in other words, you're going to know when your boundaries are being violated, whether it is the partner violating them and or whether we are violating our own boundaries, right? And usually the second is the one that's a lot harder to get over. So for example, I have a heterosexual client, and I will refer to this person as Sally. And Sally complained that her partner, John, didn't respect her. And then John would feel angry, confused, and defensive when she would say this because he thought that, he did respect her. And so Sally would have a hard time explaining why she felt so disrespected, and at least not to John's satisfaction. He didn't really understand it. So together we would implement a step-by-step process for sorting through her feelings and finding clarity around her needs and boundaries so that they could be clearly communicated to John, right? As clear as we could get it. And so the first step is to identify exactly and specifically what she didn't like that made her feel so disrespected. So for one example, she would say, "I don't like it when John talks down to me," right? So I want to pause there for a second and just point out that up until this moment, Sally had also been violating her own boundaries by silently accepting being condescended to in order to avoid the tremendous fear that she had around the idea that if she spoke up about that, John might leave her. Okay. So Sally had compromised that boundary to find relief from the attachment anxiety she felt, but it still left her with a pain in her throat, a sick feeling in her stomach, because deep down it meant that she felt trapped in a demeaning situation, right? And I point this out because when we are choosing to recover from a relationship in which we felt neglected or dismissed or unacknowledged, or even from a partner who was diagnosably narcissistic, or even our own narcissistic wounding, right? When we have to confront this, we are going to be confronting our attachment anxieties, okay? And when we are able to do that, that means that we can begin to honor our more authentic needs and boundaries that exist beneath it. So that means recognizing when our attachment systems or our nervous systems are flared up in survival mode, right? The response of the attachment system versus true needs and desires that stem from, let's call it a spirit-based place, or a place of intuition, or a place of being filled up, right? So until we can become aware of the fact that our attachment impulses are survival impulses, they're always going to trump our good sense until we can raise our consciousness around them so that we can mitigate those triggers. Okay, so that means that anytime you feel a jolt of attachment anxiety, instead of running from it, cutting it off, or looking for a quick fix solution like suppressing our voice, right? We might instead try to take a deep breath, find something physical to support ourselves, whether it's sitting in a chair, crossing your legs on the floor, leaning against a wall, putting a hand on the counter, finding something physical to support ourselves, right? And placing a hand where you're noticing that anxiety is stemming from, leaning into it a little bit and listening to the wisdom that it has for you, because it does have something for you. So what might the tight throat and the sick stomach be telling Sally about her authentic needs and love, right? So sometimes decoding this means looking at the opposite of what you don't like about something, and that is the next step. So in this case, Sally says, "I don't like it when John talks down to me." So then we realized that had been allowed to go on because she had attachment anxiety around it. She experienced an attachment threat around the idea of expressing discomfort or dis-ease or dislike for his condescension, right?
So she wasn't vocalizing it. So then when she doesn't vocalize it, now he's violating the boundary and she's violating the boundary, right? So first, let's look at what would satisfy that for her. And Sally came up with, well, I like it when John listens to me and treats me like an equal. Now, once Sally said that out loud, once she actually just said it out loud, she felt an immediate tension release in her throat and in her stomach, right? Now, after this, the next step is to incorporate some of the feeling words that she'd been adding to her vocabulary list, right? We just talked about building an emotional vocabulary. So she'd been adding some feeling words to her vocabulary list. And this was to help emphasize the emotional impact of the situation to John, right? So it goes something like this. I don't like when John talks down to me because it makes me feel uncomfortable, disconnected, disrespected, worthless. And that means that I am unequal, I am left out, I am disrespected, and therefore not all that important, okay? And that discourages me from acting in support of him or on his behalf because I feel resentful. And of course, we can see how that spirals into power dynamics and defensive communication, right? But then we also have to look at the flip side. Now we know what she doesn't like, but where does she like? What does she want? What does she like? So this is Sally's statement. On the other hand, I like it when John regards me as an equal because it makes me feel powerful and included. It encourages me to want to support him and help him out because I feel appreciated, right? So it might seem like these are obvious things, but it's actually not always so easy to put these things into words, especially when we are used to being flooded with our emotions or energetic charge or what's sometimes called affect, right? Now, I just want you to notice how in communicating with her language in this way, she's already taken a fourth step, which is using her feelings to identify and honor her deeper need in a relationship, which in the second statement was to feel powerful and to feel included, right? Okay, so then John, of course, John comes back and John says, well, I thought I was treating you like an equal and I try to include you in things already. So now to avoid any confusion, we're going to get even more specific. And this is the fifth step. I'm going to give you all the steps in summary at the end. And that is eliminating any vagueness. Okay, and I like to do this by assigning what Marshall Rosenberg calls positive action language to, in this case, Sally's statement. And the easiest way to do this is to simply ask a few questions. So how do you know when you are being treated like an equal? And actually, I'd love to ask those of you here on the call, how do you know when you're being treated like an equal, right? You can just give me a little comment there. How do you know when you're being treated like an equal? What's happening? What words are being said to you? What actions are being taken in response to you? In your circumstances, what creates the condition in which you know that you're being treated like an equal, right? What are the specific words or behaviors that make you feel included, right? What makes you feel included? And when and where do you feel the most powerful in your life, right? So this is where we're going to start adding specificity, and that speaks to positive action language. So as you're typing that in there, Sally was able to put this statement together in response to these questions. She said, I feel like an equal when my partner John asks my opinion on his work-related things specifically. Also, when his tone of voice is direct, when he doesn't beat around the bush, or try to cushion something to protect my feelings. It also makes me feel included when he invites me out with his friends, when he asks me to join him in a recreational activity, or wants to process his thoughts and feelings with me in an intimate way. It makes me feel important and powerful to know that he enjoys spending his free time with me and that he trusts me with his private information, right? So those are some examples from Sally. Now, that's very specific and clear, isn't it? That's going to help John to really understand why Sally hates it, for example, when he never discusses work at home, keeps her in the dark about difficult emotional experiences, declines to invite her out with his friends, or kept somebody else as his closest confidant, right? Because now we know more specifically that all of those things are going to make her feel unequal, left out, disrespected, and not all that important. Meanwhile, John was doing those things because he thought he was protecting her from having to deal with his stress and discomfort, or awkwardly hanging out with his friends who he felt had little to nothing in common with her. So you can see how when we establish this type of clarity around our needs, our wants, our boundaries, and speaking in a much more direct way, now we can understand why John thought he was doing all the things that she wanted and needed, and she didn't think he was, right? I also want to point out that this is a way of communicating that gave Sally a chance to see if John was really willing to take her needs and feelings into equal priority, because it was now crystal clear on what action steps he could take or not take to repair their connection and support the growth of their relationship, right? So I'm going to review those things one more time. So the steps that we just discussed in example was, number one, to identify what you don't like and want. Number two, to look at the opposite of that so that we can realize what you do like, want, and need. Then number three is to recognize what are the feelings associated with those wants and needs. The fourth step was to name the deeper need, the underlying need, like the visceral aspect that those feelings represent. So in this case, for example, Sally's was to feel to feel equal, to feel included, right? And to feel important. Those were her sort of deeper underlying needs. And then also to add in the specifics and clarity with the positive action language, which was the last example where we realized talking about work, intimate confidences, participating in recreational activities, and what was the other one? And also being trusted with private information, right? All of these were very specific things that communicated to her the satisfaction or the withholding of those needs being met. So altogether, I believe that when we can implement these 5 steps, it really amounts to the recognition of what are our spirit-based needs versus our fearful-based vague, like the vagueness that happens when we're lumping everything together. And this is what allows us to establish those personal boundaries, independent of being in a survival mode defensive response.
Overall, the process of healing and recovery from narcissistic abuse, and even your own narcissistic wounding, is cultivating a sense of felt security by building your own emotional vocabulary, so you can clarify your authentic needs and establish boundaries around them. Once you set yourself to the task of clarifying these things, not only do you have greater clarity about who you are and what you really want, but you're better able to advocate for those things and communicate your needs more effectively. And that leads to inviting healthier, secure relationships into your life in the future. In summary, it's important to remember that the process of recovering from narcissistic abuse or wounding can be challenging, but it is not impossible. Like any healing journey, it takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes a little self-compassion. And the recovery process is both an individual and usually a relational endeavor. It requires building a more robust emotional vocabulary so you can better discern between survival mode attachment anxiety and the authentic needs and desires of your spirit. And once you have an adequate vocabulary to work with, it becomes so much easier to follow a simple 5-step process for clarifying those things, as well as the boundaries around them, so you can set healthy limits in relationships. That clarity is also going to help you get more of what you really need and want from future secure partners, because they are going to know how best to respond to your specific needs and wants. Now, in the next part of this video series, I'm going to demonstrate an art therapy activity to help you harness your energy and cultivate stronger personal boundaries and a sense of felt security. So make sure that you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications, because you do not want to miss out on the last part of this series. Thank you, and have a great week.